Hi guys, Auntie Amy here again. I'm here to read another story. Today we have the story of Holly and Ivy. It looks so cute, but it's written by Rumer, Godden, and Barbara Cooney. This is a story about wishing. It's also about a doll and a little girl. It begins with the doll. Her name, of course, was Holly. It could not have been anything else, for she was dressed for Christmas in a red dress and red shoes, though her petticoat and socks were green. She was 12 inches high. She had real gold hair, brown glass eyes that could open and shut, and teeth like tiny china pearls. It was the morning of Christmas Eve, the last day before Christmas. The toys in Mr. Blossom's toy shop in the little country town stirred and shook themselves after the long night. "We must be sold today," they said. "Today?" asked Holly. She had been unpacked only the day before and was the newest toy in the shop. Outside in the street it was snowing, but the toy shop window was lit and warm. It had been lit all night. The tops showed their glinting colors, the balls their bands of red and yellow and blue. The trains were ready to run around and round. The sailing boats shook out their fresh white sails. The clockwork toys had each its private key. The tea sets gleamed in their boxes. There were drums and airplanes, trumpets and doll perambulators. The rocking horses looked as if they were prancing, and the teddy bears held up their furry arms. There was every kind of stuffed animal, rabbits and lions and tigers, dogs and cats, and even chimpanzees. The dolls were on a long glass shelf decorated with tinsel. Baby dolls and bride dolls with bridesmaids in every color, a boy doll in a kilt and another who was a sailor. One girl doll was holding her gloves, another an umbrella. They were all beautiful, but none had been sold. "We must be sold today," said the dolls. "Today," said Holly. Like the teddy bears, the dolls held out their arms. Toys, of course, think the opposite way of you. "We shall have a little boy or girl for Christmas," said the toys. "Will I?" asked Holly. "We shall have homes." "Will I?" asked Holly. The toys knew what homes were like from the broken dolls who came to the shop to be mended. "There are warm fires and lights," said the dolls. "Rooms filled with lovely things. We feel children's hands." "Ah, children's hands are rough," said the big toy owl who sat on a pretend branch below the dolls. "They are rough. They can squeeze." "I want to be squeezed," said a little elephant. "We have never felt a child's hands," said two baby hippopotamuses. They were made of gray velvet, and their pink velvet mouths were open and as wide as the rest of them. Their names were Mallow and Wallow. Maybe it's Mallow and Wallow. You tell me what you think. "We have never felt a child's hands." Neither, of course, had Holly. The owl's name was Abracadabra. He was so big and important that he thought the toy shop belonged to him. "I thought it belonged to Mr. Blossom," said Holly. "Tss, too," said Abracadabra, which was his way of being cross. Does a new little doll dare to speak?" "Be careful," the dolls warned Holly. Abracadabra had widespread wings marked with yellow and brown, a big hooked beak, and white felt feet like claws. Above his eyes were two fierce black tufts, and the eyes themselves were so big and green that they made green shadows on his round white cheeks. His eyes saw everything, even at night. Even the biggest toys were afraid of Abracadabra. Mallow and Wallow shook on their round stubby feet each time he spoke. "He might think we're mice," said Mallow and Wallow. "My mice," said Abracadabra. "Mr. Blossom's mice," said Holly. Holly's place on the glass shelf was quite close to Abracadabra. He gave her a look with his green eyes. "This is the last day for shopping," he said. "Tomorrow the shop will be shut." A shiver went round all the dolls, but Holly knew Abracadabra was talking to her. "But the fathers and mothers will come today," said the little elephant. He was called Crumple because his skin did not fit, but hung in comfortable folds round his neck and his knees. He had a scarlet flannel saddle hung with bells, and his trunk, his mouth, and his tail all turned up, which gave him a cheerful expression. It was easy for Crumple to be cheerful. On his saddle was a ticket marked "Sold." He had only to be made into a parcel. "Will I be a parcel?" asked Holly. "I'm sure you will," said Crumple. And he waved his trunk at her and told the dolls, "You will be put into Christmas stockings." "Ooh," said the dolls longingly. "Or hung on Christmas trees." "Ah," said the dolls. "But you won't all be sold," said Abracadabra, and Holly knew he was talking to her. The sound of a key in the lock was heard. It was Mr. Blossom coming to open the shop. Peter, the shop boy, was close behind him. "We shall be busy today," said Mr. Blossom. "Yes, sir," said Peter. There could be no more talking, but "We can wish, we must wish," whispered the dolls, and Holly whispered, "I am wishing." "Hoo, hoo," went Abracadabra. It did not matter if Peter and Mr. Blossom heard him. It was his toy owl sound. "Hoo, hoo." They did not know, but the toys all knew that it was Abracadabra's way of laughing. The toys thought that all children have homes, but all children have not. Far away in the city was a big house called St. Agnes's, where 30 boys and girls had to live together. But now, for 3 days, they were saying goodbye to St. Agnes's. "A kind lady or gentleman has asked for you for Christmas," Miss Shepherd, who looked after them all, had told them. One by one the children were called for or taken to the train. Soon there would be no one left in the big house but Miss Shepherd and Ivy. Ivy was a little girl 6 years old with straight hair cut in a fringe, blue-gray eyes, and a turned-up nose. She had a green coat the color of her name and red gloves, but no lady or gentleman had asked for her for Christmas. "I don't care," said Ivy. Sometimes in Ivy there was an empty feeling, and the emptiness ached. It ached so much that she had to say something quickly in case she cried, and "I don't care at all," said Ivy. "You will care," said the last boy, Barnabas, who was waiting for a taxi. "Cook has gone, the maids have gone, and Miss Shepherd is going to her sister." "You will care," said Barnabas. "I won't," said Ivy, and she said more quickly, "I'm going to my grandmother." "You haven't got a grandmother," said Barnabas. "We don't have them." That was true. The boys and girls at St. Agnes's had no fathers and mothers, let alone grandmothers. "But I have," said Ivy, "at Appleton." I do not know how that name came into Ivy's head. Perhaps she had heard it somewhere. She said it again, "In Appleton." "Bet you haven't," said Barnabas, as he went on saying that until his taxi came. When Barnabas had gone, Miss Shepherd said, "Ivy, I shall have to send you to the country to our infants' home." "Infants are babies," said Ivy. "I'm not a baby." But Miss Shepherd only said, "There is nowhere else for you to go." "I'll go to my grandmother," said Ivy. "You haven't got a grandmother," said Miss Shepherd. "I'm sorry to send you to the infants' home, for there won't be much for you to see there, or anyone to talk to, but I don't know what else to do with you. My sister has influenza, and I have to go and nurse her." "I'll help you," said Ivy. "You might catch it," said Miss Shepherd. "That wouldn't do." And she took Ivy to the station and put her on the train. She put Ivy's suitcase in the rack and gave her a packet of sandwiches, an apple, a ticket, 2 shillings, and a parcel that was her Christmas present. Onto Ivy's coat she pinned a label with the address of the infant's home. "Be a good girl," said Miss Shepherd. When Miss Shepherd had gone, Ivy tore off the label and threw it out the window. "I'm going to my grandmother," said Ivy. All day long people came in and out of the toy shop. Mr. Blossom and Peter were so busy they could hardly snatch a cup of tea. Crumple was made into a parcel and taken away. Teddy bears and sailing ships were brought out of the window. Dolls were lifted down from the shelf. The boy doll in the kilt and the doll with the gloves were sold. Baby dolls and brides. Holly held out her arms and smiled her china smile. Each time a little girl came to the window and looked, pressing her face against the glass, Holly asked, "Are you my Christmas girl?" Each time the shop door opened, she was sure it was for her. I am here, I am Holly, and she wished. Ask for me, lift me down, ask. But nobody asked. Ivy was still in the train. She had eaten her sandwiches almost at once and opened her present. She had hoped and believed she would have a doll this Christmas, but the present was a pencil box. A doll would have filled up the emptiness, and now it ached so much that Ivy had to press her lips together tightly, and "My grandmother will give me a doll," she said out loud. "Will she, dear?" asked a lady sitting opposite, and the people in the carriage all looked at Ivy and smiled. "And where does your grandmother live?" asked a gentleman. "In Appleton," said Ivy. The lady nodded. "That will be 2 or 3 stations," she said. Then there is an Appleton, thought Ivy. The lady got out, more people got in, and the train went on. Ivy grew sleepy watching the snowflakes fly past the window. The train seemed to be going very fast, and she leaned her head against the carriage cushions and shut her eyes. When she opened them, the train had stopped at a small station, and the people in her carriage were all getting out. The gentleman lifted her suitcase down from the rack. APTN, said the notice boards. Ivy could not read very well, but she knew A was for Appleton. Forgetting all about her suitcase and the pencil box, she climbed down from the train, slammed the carriage door behind her, and followed the crowd of people as they went through the station gate. The ticket collector had so many tickets he did not look at hers. In a moment, Ivy was out in the street, and the train had chuffed out of the station. "I don't care," said Ivy. "This is where my grandmother lives." The country town looked pleasant and clean after the city. There were cobbled streets going up and down, and houses with gables overhanging the pavements, and roofs jumbled together. Some of the houses had windows with many small panes. Some had doors with brass knockers. The paint was bright and the curtains clean. "I like where my grandmother lives," said Ivy. Presently, she came to the market square where the Christmas market was going on. There were stalls of turkeys and geese, fruit stalls with oranges, apples, nuts, and tangerines that were like small oranges wrapped in silver paper. Some stalls had holly, mistletoe, and Christmas trees. Some had flowers. There were stalls of china and glass, and one with wooden spoons and bowls. A woman was selling balloons, and an old man was cooking hot chestnuts. Men were shouting, and the women had shopping bags and baskets. The children were running. Everyone was buying or selling or laughing. Ivy had spent all her life in St. Agnes's. She had not seen a market before, and "I won't look for my grandmother yet," said Ivy. In the toy shop, Mr. Blossom had never made so much money. Peter had never worked so hard. Peter was 15. He had red cheeks and a smile as wide as Mallow and Wallow's. He took good care of the toys, did everything he could to help Mr. Blossom. Whish went the brown paper as Peter pulled it off the roll. Whirr went the string ball. Snip, snap, the scissors cut off the string. He did up dozens of parcels, ran up and down the stepladder, fetched and carried and took away. "That abominable boy will sell every toy in the shop," grumbled Abracadabra. "What's abominable?" asked Holly. "It means not good," said the dolls. "But he is good. Dear, dear Peter," whispered the dolls. But Abracadabra's green eyes had caught the light from a passing car. They gave a flash, and rattle bang! Peter fell down the stepladder from top to bottom. He bumped his elbow, grazed his knee, and tore a big hole in his pocket. "Hold on, go slow," said Mr. Blossom. "Yes, sir," said poor Peter in a very little voice. "Did you see that? Did you see that?" whispered the dolls. Holly wished she were farther away from Abracadabra. Soon all the baby dolls but one were sold, and most of the teddy bears. Mallow and Wallow were taken for twin boys' stockings. They were done up in 2 little parcels and carried away. Hardly a ball was left, and not a single airplane. The sailor doll was sold, and the doll with the umbrella, but still no one had asked for Holly. Dolls are not like us. We are alive as soon as we are born, but dolls are not really alive until they're played with. "I want to be played with," said Holly. "I want someone to move my arms and legs, to make me open and shut my eyes. I wish," said Holly. It began to be dark. The dusk made the lightened window shine so brightly that everyone stopped to look in. The children pressed their faces so closely against the glass that the tips of their noses looked like white cherries. Holly held out her arms and smiled her china smile, but the children walked away. Stop, stop, wished Holly, but they did not stop. Abracadabra's eyes shone in the dusk. Holly began to be very much afraid. One person stopped, but it was not a boy or girl. It was Mrs. Jones, the policeman's wife. From down the street. She was passing the toy shop on her way home when Holly's red dress caught her eye. Pretty, said Mrs. Jones, and stopped. You and I would have felt Holly's wish at once, but Mrs. Jones had no children, and it was so long since she had known a doll that she did not understand. Only a feeling stirred in her that she had not had for a long time, a feeling of Christmas. And when she got home, she told Mr. Jones, "This year we shall have a tree." "Don't be daft," said Mr. Jones. But when Mrs. Jones had put her shopping away, a chicken and a small plum pudding for her and Mr. Jones's Christmas dinner, a piece of fish for the cat, and a dozen fine handkerchiefs, which were Mr. Jones' present, she went back to the market and bought some holly, mistletoe, and a Christmas tree. A tree should have tinsel, said Mrs. Jones, and she bought some tinsel. And candles, she said. Candles are prettier than electric light. She bought 12 red candles. And they need candle clips, she said, and bought 12 of those. And a tree should have some balls, thought Mrs. Jones. Glass balls in jewel colors, ruby red, emerald green, and gold. She bought some balls and a box of tiny silver crackers and a tinsel star. When she got home, she stood the tree in the window and dressed it, putting the star on the top. "Who is to look at it?" asked Mr. Jones. Mrs. Jones thought for a moment and said, "Christmas needs children, Albert." Albert was Mr. Jones's name. "I wonder," said Mrs. Jones, "could we find a little girl?" "What's the matter with you today, my dear?" said Mr. Jones. "How could we find a little girl? You're daft." And it was, a little sadly, that Mrs. Jones put holly along the chimney shelf, hung mistletoe in the hall, and tied a bunch of holly on the door knocker, and went back to her housework. Ivy was happy in the market. She walked round and round the stalls, looking at all the things. Sometimes a snowflake fell on her head, but she shook it off. Sometimes one stuck to her cheek, but she put out her tongue and licked it away. She bought a bag of chestnuts from the chestnut man. They were hot in her hands, and she ate them one by one. She had a white cup of tea from the tea stall on wheels, and from a sweet stall she bought a toffee apple. When her legs grew tired, she sat down on the step and wrapped the ends of her coat round her knees. When she was cold, she started to walk again. Soon lights were lit all along the stalls. They looked like stars. The crowd grew thicker. People laughed and stamped in the snow to keep their feet warm. Ivy stamped too. The stall keeper shouted and called for people to come and buy. Ivy bought a blue balloon. At St. Agnes's, a telegraph boy rang the bell. He had a telegram for Miss Shepherd from the infant's home. It said, "Ivy not arrived." "Suppose she is with you. Merry Christmas." The boy rang and rang, but there was no one at St. Agnes's to answer the bell. And at last he put a notice in the letter box, got on his bicycle, and rode away. Well, I'm going to take a break here. So this will be part 1, and I'll come back in a little bit to read the rest of it, okay? I love you. I will talk to you soon.